The colony ship Meadowlark broke through the clouds of Vern 4 on a cold morning. The sky was pale green, like nothing anyone on board had ever seen. Daniel Cooper pressed his face against the small window and watched the alien forest grow larger as the ship descended. He was 43 years old, a carpenter from Montana, and he had left behind a dying Earth for the promise of something new. The ship landed with a heavy thud. The doors opened, and 100 settlers stepped onto alien soil for the first time. The air smelled strange, like wet metal and flowers mixed together. The trees were tall and thin, with silver leaves that made soft ringing sounds when the wind touched them. Daniel carried his tools in a large bag over his shoulder. He had brought his father's hammer, his grandfather's measuring tape, and enough handsaws to build a house. People had laughed at him back on Earth. They said he was foolish to bring old tools to a new world. But Daniel knew that some things never changed. Wood was wood. Nails were nails. A man who could build with his hands would always find work. The first week was busy. The colonists set up their modular shelters, white plastic units that snapped together like children's toys. They were designed to be temporary, easy to take apart and move. The company that made them promised they could survive most weather conditions. Most, but not all. Daniel helped where he could, but he spent his evenings walking the edges of the settlement. He was looking for the right spot, the right trees, the right ground. On the 7th day, he found it. A small clearing at the edge of the silver forest, with a stream nearby and good drainage. The soil was firm, but not too hard. Perfect for building. That was when the Varangi came. They appeared between the trees like ghosts. Tall and thin, almost 7 feet high, with skin that looked like soap bubbles. Colors moved across their bodies, shifting and changing with their moods. Their eyes were large and dark, like deep pools of water. The leader was called Desak. Daniel learned later that Desak was very old, maybe 300 years in human terms. The Varangi lived long lives and remembered long histories. Desak watched Daniel mark out the ground for his cabin. The alien said nothing at first, just observed with those deep, dark eyes. Finally, Desak spoke. The Varangi had learned English from the colony's communication signals during the long approach to their world. "You marked the ground," Desak said. "Why?" Daniel looked up from his work. "I am going to build a house." "A house?" Desak seemed to taste the word. "A permanent structure." "That's right. This is not wise." Daniel had heard warnings before. His father had warned him not to take over the family farm. His wife had warned him not to volunteer for the colony mission. She had stayed behind on Earth, choosing comfort over adventure. Daniel had chosen differently. Why is it not wise? He asked. Desak looked at the green sky. The crystalline winds, they come every cycle when the sky turns yellow. They destroy everything that stands against them. Our ancestors built great cities of stone and metal. The winds turned them to dust. We learned to move, to flow like water around the storms. We do not build permanent things anymore. Daniel nodded slowly. He understood storms. Montana had tornadoes that could lift a truck and throw it a mile. He had seen the damage they could do. "How long until these winds come?" he asked. "Perhaps 10 of your months. Perhaps 12. The sky will warn us. That's enough time." Desak's colors shifted to a pale blue that Daniel would later learn meant confusion. "Enough time for what?" "To build something that can survive." The alien made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was soft and musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You do not understand. Nothing survives the crystalline winds. Nothing built by hands, at least. Only the mountains endure, and even they are worn down over time." Daniel picked up his hammer and felt its familiar weight in his hand. My grandfather built a barn in Montana in 1962. A tornado destroyed it in 1989. He built another barn, this time with a windbreak wall around it. That barn stood for 40 more years until he died and the land was sold. What is a tornado? A spinning wind. Very fast, very strong. It picks up everything in its path and throws it around. Desok considered this. Our winds do not spin. They blow straight, like a river of air filled with tiny knives. The crystals in the air cut through everything. Then, I will build thick walls. The crystals will wear them down. Then, I will build walls that can be worn down and still stand. The Verni looked at Daniel for a long moment. The colors on Desok's skin shifted through several shades that Daniel could not read. You are a strange creature, Desok finally said. You know you will fail, yet you try anyway. Daniel smiled. It was not a happy smile, but it was genuine. That's what humans do. We fail, and we try again. We keep trying until we succeed or until we die. Sometimes we succeed. Sometimes we don't. But we always try. Desok left without another word. But Daniel noticed that the alien looked back several times, watching him work. Over the next few days, more Verni came to watch. They stood at the edge of the clearing, their colorful skin shifting and changing as they discussed what they saw. Daniel paid them little attention. He had work to do. He cut trees from the forest, choosing the thickest trunks with the densest wood. The silver trees of Vern 4 were harder than oak and lighter than pine. They would make excellent walls. He dug foundations deep into the soil, finding bedrock only 4 feet down. He mixed mortar from local minerals that Katie Morgan, the colony's engineer, helped him identify. Katie was curious about his project. She came by often, asking questions and taking notes. She was young, maybe 30, with short brown hair and clever eyes. The other colonists think you're crazy, she told him one evening. Daniel drove a nail into a beam. What do you think? I think you're stubborn. Is that a bad thing? Katie watched him work for a while. My grandmother was stubborn. She refused to leave her house in New Orleans during the floods. Everyone said she was foolish. Did she survive? She did. Her house didn't, but she did. She rebuilt it, exactly where it was before. Lived there for another 20 years. Daniel nodded. He understood. The cabin took shape slowly. 4 walls, a roof, a stone fireplace, real glass windows that Daniel had brought from Earth at great expense. It was not a large cabin, just 2 rooms and a small porch. But it was solid. It was real. It was home. And when it was finished, Daniel started planning the second wall. The morning sun cast long shadows across the clearing as Daniel began hauling stones from the riverbed. Each stone was heavy, smooth from centuries of water flow, and perfect for what he had in mind. He made trip after trip, piling them near the cabin until his arms ached and his back screamed for rest. Katie found him there on the 3rd day of this new work. She stood at the edge of the clearing with her arms crossed, watching him drop another load of stones onto the growing pile. I thought you were finished, she said. Daniel wiped sweat from his face with a dirty cloth. The cabin is finished. Now I'm building a wall. You already have walls. 4 of them. I watched you build them. He pointed to the ground, where he had marked a circle around the cabin. The circle was about 20 feet away from the cabin on all sides. This is a different wall. An outer wall. Katie walked closer and looked at the marked circle. She was smart, one of the smartest people in the colony, and Daniel could see her mind working as she studied his plan. Like a fortress, she said. Like a windbreak. My grandfather used to build them around his barns. The outer wall takes the first hit. It slows down the wind before it reaches the main building. Will that work against the crystalline winds? Daniel picked up another stone and tested its weight. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Word of Daniel's project spread through the colony like fire through dry grass. Some colonists came to watch and shake their heads. Others came to offer advice, most of it useless. A few came to laugh. Marcus Webb, the colony leader, visited on the 5th day. He was a tall man with gray hair and a serious face. He had been a military commander on Earth before joining the colony mission. Cooper, he said, using Daniel's last name the way military people often did. I've been hearing about your wall. Daniel kept working. It's not a secret. The Varnai say it's pointless. They say nothing built by hands can survive their storms. The Varnai haven't met many humans. Marcus watched him work in silence for a while. The colony leader was not a fool. He knew that sometimes the stubborn ones were the ones who changed things. I can't give you any official resources, Marcus finally said. We need everything for the main colony. I'm not asking for resources, but I won't stop anyone who wants to help you on their own time. Daniel paused and looked at Marcus. Something passed between them, a kind of understanding that did not need words. Thank you, Daniel said. Marcus nodded and walked away. The Varnai came more often now. They stood in groups at the edge of the forest, their colorful skin flashing with patterns that Daniel was slowly learning to read. Blue meant confusion. Yellow meant curiosity. Red meant anger or fear. Green meant amusement. There was a lot of green. A young Varnai named Kirith became a regular visitor. Kirith was smaller than the others, maybe 6 feet tall, and spoke excellent English. The young alien had been assigned as a cultural liaison between the two species. I have been studying your history, Kirith said one afternoon, watching Daniel mix mortar. You have destroyed yourselves many times. Wars, plagues, famines. Your own planet is dying because of your choices. Yet, you keep building. Daniel spread mortar on a stone and set it in place. What else would we do? You could accept reality. You could adapt to the universe instead of fighting it. We do adapt. We adapt by building. We adapt by creating. We adapt by refusing to give up. Kirith's skin flashed yellow with curiosity. But why? What is the purpose of building something that will be destroyed? Daniel stopped working and turned to face the young alien. He thought about the question for a long moment before answering. My grandmother had a garden, he said. She planted flowers every spring, knowing that winter would kill them. Every year, the same thing. Plant in spring, watch them grow in summer, watch them die in fall. She did this for 60 years. That seems pointless. I asked her once why she bothered. She told me that the point was not whether the flowers survived. The point was that she planted them. The point was that something beautiful existed, even if only for a little while. The point was that she did not let winter stop her from creating spring. Kirith was silent. The alien's skin shifted through several colors that Daniel did not recognize. I do not fully understand, Kirith finally admitted. That's okay. Understanding takes time. The wall grew higher every day. Daniel worked from sunrise to sunset, stopping only to eat and sleep. His hands became rough and calloused. His muscles hardened. He lost weight and gained strength. Katie started helping in the evenings after her official duties were done. She learned to mix mortar and select good stones. She was a quick learner and a hard worker. Why are you helping me? Daniel asked her one night as they watched the stars appear in the green sky. Katie thought about the question. Because I want to see if it works. Because I'm tired of running from things. Because my grandmother was stubborn and I want to be like her. Those are good reasons. Also because someone should record what happens. If this works, we need to know how. If it fails, we need to know why. Daniel smiled. Always the engineer. Always. By the end of the 3rd month, The outer wall was 4 feet high. It was made of river stones bound together with strong mortar. The wall was almost 3 feet thick at the base, narrowing to 2 feet at the top. There were no gates or openings, except for a narrow gap on the side facing away from the direction of the prevailing winds. The Ver and I watched with growing interest. Desok came to visit again, walking slowly around the half-finished wall with those deep, dark eyes studying every detail. "You are serious about this," Desok said. "I was always serious. Our ancestors built walls. Many walls. The winds destroyed them all." Daniel set down his tools and faced the ancient alien. "Tell me about those walls. How were they built? How thick were they? How tall?" Desok's color shifted. "I do not know the details. I have only seen the ruins." "Then how do you know my wall will fail?" The question hung in the air between them. Desok had no answer. Daniel picked up his tools and went back to work. "The difference between your ancestors and me," he said, "is that I'm going to be here when the storm comes. I'm going to watch what happens. I'm going to learn. And if my wall fails, the next person who tries will know what not to do. And if you die?" Daniel shrugged. "Then at least I died trying." The wall reached 8 feet by the end of the 5th month. Daniel reinforced the base with extra layers of stone. He mixed special mortar with minerals that Katie said would help resist erosion. He built the wall to lean slightly inward so that wind would flow up and over rather than pushing straight through. And then the sky began to change. The pale green faded slowly, day by day, turning to yellow like a bruise spreading across the heavens. The Varnai began their migration. Great caravans of beings moving toward the eastern mountains, where caves offered shelter from the coming storm. Desok visited one last time before leaving. "You can still come with us," the elder said. "There is room in the caves. You will be safe." Daniel looked at his cabin, at his wall, at everything he had built. Then he looked at the yellowing sky. "This is my home," he said. "I'm not leaving." Desok nodded slowly. The alien's colors were deep blue, the color of sadness. "Then I hope your walls are strong enough, human. I hope your stubbornness is not your death." "So do I," Daniel said. "So do I." The sky grew more yellow with each passing day. It was not a pretty yellow, not like sunshine or flowers. It was the yellow of sickness, of warning, of something terrible approaching. The colonists looked up at it and felt fear growing in their hearts. Marcus Webb called an emergency meeting in the colony's main hall. Every settler was there, packed into the small space like fish in a can. The air was thick with worry and the smell of nervous sweat. "The Ver and I have given us 14 days, Marcus announced. His voice was calm, but Daniel could see the tension in the man's shoulders. 14 days before the crystalline winds arrive. They have offered to guide us to the mountain caves where we can wait out the storm." A murmur passed through the crowd. People whispered to each other, their faces pale with worry. "What about our homes?" Someone asked. "What about everything we've built?" Marcus shook his head. "The modular units can be rebuilt. That's what they're designed for. We pack up what matters, we survive the storm, and we come back and start again." Dr. Linda Rios, the colony's physician, stepped forward. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a practical mind. "The Varani have survived on this planet for thousands of years. They know what they're talking about. We should listen to them." Most of the colonists nodded in agreement. It made sense. Follow the experts. Trust those who knew the land. Survive first, rebuild later. Daniel stood at the back of the room and said nothing. When the meeting ended, he walked out without speaking to anyone and went back to his cabin. The outer wall stood around it like a stone embrace. 8 feet of solid rock protecting the little wooden house inside. Katie found him there an hour later. He was checking the mortar, looking for cracks or weak spots that needed fixing. You heard what Marcus said. She stated. I heard. The Virani know these storms, Daniel. They've been living with them for 10,000 years. Daniel ran his hand along the rough surface of his wall. They've been running from them for 10,000 years. There's a difference. Running has kept them alive. Running has kept them from learning. He turned to face her. Think about it, Katie. They built cities once. Great cities of stone and metal. The storms destroyed those cities, and instead of trying again, instead of figuring out what went wrong, they gave up. They decided that building was pointless. They decided to run forever. Katie crossed her arms. And you think you can do better than an entire civilization? No, but I think I can try. And maybe I'll fail, just like they did. But at least I'll know why. At least the next person who tries will have more information than I had. The wind picked up, making the silver leaves ring in the forest. The sound was beautiful and strange, like nothing Daniel had ever heard on Earth. Why does this matter so much to you? Katie asked. It's just a cabin. Just walls and wood and stone. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. My grandfather built the farm in Montana with his own hands. He cleared the land, dug the foundations, raised the barns. He did it because his father had lost everything in the Depression, and my grandfather wanted to build something that couldn't be taken away. Something solid. Something permanent. He paused, memories playing across his face like shadows. The farm survived everything. Tornadoes, floods, droughts, recessions. It survived because my grandfather refused to give up on it. He fixed what broke. He rebuilt what fell. He taught my father to do the same, and my father taught me. What happened to the farm? I sold it before I came here. Earth was dying, and there was no future for farms anymore. But I promised myself that I would build again. I would find a new world and build something permanent. Something that would survive. Katie looked at the cabin, at the wall, at the yellowing sky above. She understood now. This was not just about survival. This was about identity. This was about what it meant to be human. If you're staying, she said slowly, then I'm staying too. Daniel shook his head. You don't have to do that. I know. But I want to. I want to see what happens. I want to know if this crazy plan of yours actually works. They stood together in silence, watching the sick yellow sky grow darker as evening approached. Over the next few days, the colony packed up and prepared to leave. People gathered their important belongings, shut down their modular units, and formed caravans to follow the Virani to the mountains. But not everyone left. First came Katie, with her tools and her measuring equipment and her curious mind. Then came two brothers, Sam and Eric Patterson, who had worked as construction workers on Earth and wanted to see if human building methods could survive an alien storm. Then came Rachel Green, a teacher who had grown up in Florida and survived 3 hurricanes before leaving Earth. She said she was tired of running from storms. Then came Ben and Nancy Miller, an older couple who had been farmers before joining the colony. They understood Daniel's stubbornness because they had lived it themselves. Last came young Tommy Bright, barely 20 years old, who had no particular skills but wanted to be part of something important. 7 humans in total. 7 people who chose to stay when everyone else chose to run. Marcus Webb came to see them on the last day before the evacuation. I can't order you to come with us, he said to Daniel. But I'm asking you. As a friend. Daniel shook Marcus's hand. I know, and I appreciate it. But this is something I have to do. Marcus looked at the others, at the 7 faces that had chosen to stay. You all feel this way? They nodded. Sam Patterson spoke for all of them. We're not just staying for Daniel's wall. We're staying because someone has to. Someone has to learn what these storms can actually do. Someone has to be stubborn enough to try. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his pack and pulled out a small radio. "Emergency frequency," he said, handing it to Daniel. "If things go bad, if the wall fails, call us. The caves are only 4 hours away. We might be able to come back for you." Daniel took the radio. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't die." The colony left that afternoon. Daniel stood on his porch and watched the caravans disappear into the forest, heading east toward the mountains. The Varanai guided them, their colorful skin flashing with patterns of movement and direction. Kirith was the last to leave. The young alien stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked back at the cabin and its protective wall. "I hope you survive," Kirith said. "I hope you are right, and we have been wrong all these years." "Only one way to find out," Daniel replied. Kirith nodded and disappeared into the forest. Then there was silence. The 7 humans were alone. Just them and the cabin and the wall and the yellowing sky that promised destruction. Daniel gathered everyone together on the porch. "We have 3 days before the storm hits," he said. 3 days to prepare. I need everyone to help reinforce the cabin. Extra bracing on the walls, extra shutters on the windows, sandbags around the foundation. We're going to survive this thing, but only if we work together." They nodded, all of them, their faces showing determination instead of fear. Katie raised her hand. "I've rigged up a weather sensor on the roof. It will tell us wind speed, particle density, temperature, everything we need to know about the storm. Whatever happens, we'll have data." "Good. That's exactly what we need." The 3 days passed quickly. They worked from sunrise to sunset, strengthening the cabin, filling gaps in the wall, preparing supplies of food and water. The sky grew darker, the yellow deepening into something that looked almost orange. On the final night before the storm, they gathered inside the cabin and shared a meal together. It was simple food, dried meat and vegetables from the colony supplies, but it tasted good. It tasted like community. It tasted like family. Daniel looked around at the faces of his companions. Strangers who had become friends. People who had chosen to stand instead of run. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you all to know that I'm proud to be here with you. This is what humans do. This is who we are." They raised their cups and drank to survival. Outside, the wind was beginning to rise. The storm was coming. The crystalline winds arrived at dawn on the 15th day. Daniel had been awake for hours, watching the sky through a crack in the window shutters. The orange color had spread across the entire horizon, and the clouds moved in strange patterns, spinning and twisting like living things. The air felt heavy and electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. The first sign of the storm was not the wind itself, but the sound. It started as a low hum, so deep that Daniel felt it in his chest before he heard it with his ears. Then the hum rose higher and higher, climbing through notes that hurt to listen to, until it became a scream that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Everyone inside," Daniel shouted, though his voice was barely audible above the rising noise. Shutters closed, doors barred. This is it. The 7 humans crowded into the main room of the cabin. They had prepared well. Supplies of food and water were stacked against the walls. Blankets and bedding were piled in the corners. The windows were covered with thick wooden shutters, reinforced with iron bars. The door was made of solid oak, 3 inches thick, with heavy crossbeams to hold it in place. Katie sat in the corner with her tablet, watching data stream in from the weather sensor on the roof. Her face was pale in the lamplight. "Wind speed is climbing," she reported. 50 kilometers per hour. 60. 70. Still climbing. Daniel nodded. He had expected this. The Varanai had warned them about the winds. But hearing the numbers was different from hearing the actual storm outside. The scream grew louder. It was not a natural sound, not like any wind Daniel had ever heard on Earth. It was sharp and cutting, a noise that seemed designed to cause pain. The others covered their ears, but the sound penetrated anyway. Then the crystals hit. The first impact sounded like a handful of sand thrown against the shutters. Then another impact and another, until the sounds merged into a continuous roar. It was like being inside a drum while someone beat on it with a million tiny hammers. "The outer wall is taking the first hits," Daniel said. He had to shout to be heard. "It's doing what it's supposed to do." Through the crack in the shutter, he could see his wall standing against the storm. The wind carried particles of crystal, tiny shards of silicate that glittered like diamonds in the strange orange light. They hit the wall in waves, each wave eroding a little more stone, a little more mortar. The wall was bleeding. Daniel could see pieces of it breaking away, carried off by the screaming wind. Stones that had taken him hours to place were torn free in seconds. Mortar that he had carefully mixed was ground to dust, but the wall was still standing. It was taking damage, losing height, being worn down. But it was still there, still blocking the worst of the storm from reaching the cabin. "Wind speed at 120 kilometers per hour, Katie reported. Her voice was shaking. "Particle density is off the charts. If we were outside right now, we'd be dead in seconds." Rachel Green, the teacher from Florida, closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Ben Miller held his wife Nancy close, their arms wrapped around each other. The Patterson brothers stood by the door, ready to brace it if necessary. Young Tommy Bright sat in the corner, his face white with fear, but his jaw set with determination. The cabin shook. The walls groaned. Somewhere above them, a roof beam creaked under the strain. "Hold together," Daniel muttered, pressing his hand against the wall. "Just hold together." Hours passed. The storm did not weaken. If anything, it grew stronger. The scream outside became so loud that conversation was impossible. They communicated with hand signals and written notes, passing messages back and forth in the dim lamplight. Katie's tablet showed readings that grew worse with each passing hour. Wind speeds reached 150 kilometers per hour, then 200. The particle density was so high that the air outside was more crystal than gas. Any living thing exposed to that air would be stripped to bone in minutes. On the second day, part of the outer wall collapsed. The sound was like thunder, a massive crash that shook the entire cabin. Daniel felt the floor jump beneath his feet, and for a terrible moment, he thought the cabin itself was falling. He rushed to the crack in the shutter and looked out. A section of the outer wall, maybe 20 feet long, had come down. Stones were scattered across the ground, being pushed and rolled by the screaming wind. The gap in the wall was like a wound, exposing the cabin to the full force of the storm. "We're losing the wall," he said. Katie checked her readings. "The cabin is taking more direct hits now. The wind is getting through the gap." They could feel it. The cabin shook harder. The walls creaked louder. The sound of crystals hitting wood was sharper, more immediate. One of the shutters cracked, and a thin spray of crystal dust shot into the room. "Patch it," Daniel ordered. "Whatever we have, use it." Sam Patterson grabbed a thick blanket and stuffed it against the cracked shutter. His brother Eric found wooden boards and nailed them in place. The spray stopped, but the damage was done. The shutter was weakened. It would not last another day of this. Night fell, though it was hard to tell. The storm blocked out all light, and the sky remained that terrible orange color. The 7 humans tried to sleep in shifts, but sleep was impossible. The noise was too loud, the shaking too constant, the fear too great that Daniel did not sleep at all. He sat by the door, listening to the storm, feeling his cabin fight for survival. He could hear every creak, every groan, every crack. He knew his building like he knew his own body, and he knew it was hurting. On the third day, a section of the roof began to fail. It started with a single beam, somewhere above the main room. Daniel heard it crack, a sharp sound like a gunshot. Then another crack, and another. The ceiling bulged downward, pushed by the weight of crystals accumulating on the roof. "Everyone to the back room," Daniel ordered. Now, they moved quickly, grabbing supplies and blankets. The main room was becoming dangerous. If the ceiling collapsed, anyone underneath would be crushed. The back room was smaller, but more protected. It had no windows, only solid walls and a reinforced ceiling. Daniel had built it as a storage room, but now it became a shelter. They huddled together in the darkness, listening to the storm rage above them. The sound of the main room ceiling collapsing was horrible, a crash of wood and stone that seemed to go on forever. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe, but the back room held. The ceiling above them remained solid. The walls stayed upright. "We're going to make it," Katie whispered. Her voice was hoarse from dust and fear. "The back room is holding." Daniel nodded, but he did not speak. He was listening. The storm was beginning to change. The scream was still there, but it was dropping in pitch, losing some of its terrible power. The shaking was becoming less violent. The impacts were becoming less frequent. "Wind speed dropping," Katie reported, checking her tablet. 150 kilometers per hour. 120. 100. The hours crawled by. The storm weakened slowly, reluctantly, as if it did not want to let them go. But it weakened. The scream faded to a moan, then to a whisper, then to silence. On the morning of the fourth day, Daniel opened the door. The world outside was unrecognizable. The silver forest was gone, stripped bare by the storm. The ground was covered with a layer of crystal dust that sparkled in the pale light. The sky was returning to its normal green, the orange fading away like a bad dream. The outer wall was a ruin. Most of it was gone, worn down to stumps of stone barely 2 feet high. In some places, there was nothing left at all, just bare ground where the foundation had once been. But the cabin stood. It was damaged. The main room was a wreck. The ceiling collapsed. The walls cracked and pitted. One side of the building was worn smooth by crystal impacts, the wood stripped of all texture. The stone chimney had lost half its height, but it stood. Daniel walked around the building slowly, touching the damaged walls, feeling the scars of the storm. His hands were shaking. His eyes were wet with tears that he did not try to hide. "It worked," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. The wall did what it was supposed to do. It took the hits. It absorbed the damage. It saved the cabin. Katie came out and stood beside him. She was covered in dust, her hair matted, her face streaked with dirt. But she was smiling. "We survived," she said. "We actually survived." The others emerged one by one. They looked at the ruined landscape, at the damaged cabin, at the blue-green sky above. They looked at each other. And then, without a word spoken, they began to laugh. It was not happy laughter, not exactly. It was the laughter of people who had faced death and come out the other side. It was the laughter of survivors. Daniel laughed with them. He laughed until his stomach hurt and his eyes streamed with tears. He laughed because he was alive. He laughed because his cabin was standing. He laughed because his grandfather had been right. All those years ago, sometimes the only way to beat a storm was to be more stubborn than the wind. The Varani returned from the mountains 5 days after the storm ended. They came in long caravans, their colorful skin flashing with patterns of relief and caution. They expected to find the human colony in ruins, scattered across miles of barren ground. Like all the other things the crystalline winds had destroyed, they were right about the colony. The modular units were gone, broken into pieces and blown across the landscape. The landing pad had been stripped down to bare metal. The supply depot was nothing but a crater in the ground. Every building, every structure, every sign of human civilization had been destroyed, except one. HFY led the way to Daniel's clearing. The ancient Varanian moved slowly, their dark eyes taking in every detail. The ruined outer wall, the pitted, scarred wood of the cabin, the collapsed main room with its broken beams and shattered ceiling, and the back room still standing, with 7 humans sitting on the porch drinking coffee from tin cups. HFY stopped at the edge of the clearing and stared. For a long moment, the elder said nothing. Colors moved across the HFY's skin in patterns that none of the humans could read. "This should not be," HFY finally said. "This cannot be." Daniel stood up from his chair and walked toward the Varani leader. He was tired and dirty, his clothes torn and his face bruised. But he was alive. He was standing. He was still here. "And yet it is," Daniel said. Other Varani gathered behind HFY. They crowded around the clearing, their eyes fixed on the damaged cabin and its ruined wall. Kireth was among them, the young alien pushing through the crowd to get a closer look. "You survived," Kireth said. There was wonder in the alien's voice. "You actually survived. We did." HFY walked around the cabin slowly, studying every detail. The ancient alien ran long fingers across the pitted wood, felt the rough surface of the damaged walls, examined the collapsed sections and the parts that still stood strong. "Tell me how," HFY said. "Tell me everything." So Daniel told them. He explained the outer wall, how it had taken the first impacts of the storm and absorbed damage that would have destroyed the cabin directly. He explained the thick walls and reinforced shutters, how they had held against the crystal particles when the outer wall began to fail. He explained the back room, built without windows and with extra support, where they had sheltered when the main room collapsed. Katie added technical details, showing her data on the tablet. Wind speeds, particle densities, impact forces. Numbers and graphs that proved what the Varani could see with their own eyes. "You did not try to stop the wind," HFY observed when they were finished. "You tried to survive it." Daniel nodded. "You can't fight a storm, but you can be too stubborn for it to kill you." More Varani arrived over the next few days. They came from across the region, drawn by stories of the human who had built a house that survived the crystalline winds. They studied the cabin, asked questions, took measurements. Kireth became a regular presence, taking detailed notes on everything Daniel and Katie told them. "Our ancestors built differently," Kireth explained one evening, sitting with Daniel on the damaged porch. "They built tall towers to show their power. They built thin walls with many windows to show their confidence. They believed that their knowledge and skill could defeat any force of nature. What happened to them? The winds proved them wrong. Generation after generation, the winds destroyed everything they built. Eventually, they gave up. They decided that building permanent structures was foolish, that the only way to survive was to move with the seasons and never stay in one place long enough to be destroyed." Daniel looked at his cabin, at its scarred walls and broken roof. Maybe they gave up too soon. Maybe. Kireth's skin flashed through several colors. Or maybe they were too proud. They wanted to defeat the winds completely. They did not want to survive the winds. They wanted to beat them. There's a difference? A very big difference. Defeating means the enemy is gone. Surviving means the enemy is still there, but so are you. Daniel thought about that for a long time. The colony rebuilt over the following months. But this time, they built differently. Human determination and Varani knowledge came together to create something new. The structures were low and solid, with thick walls and narrow windows. The roofs were curved to let wind flow over them instead of pushing against them. Every building had an outer wall, just like Daniel's cabin, Designed to take the first impact of any future storm, Marcus Webb made Daniel the chief builder of the new colony. It was not an official title, but everyone understood what it meant. When people had questions about construction, they came to Daniel. When there were decisions to be made about foundations and walls, Daniel made them. The Verni helped. They had knowledge of local materials, of ground conditions, of weather patterns that humans did not yet understand. HFY shared ancient records about the storms, information that had been forgotten or ignored for generations. The combined knowledge of both species created buildings that were stronger than either could have built alone. 3 cycles later, when the sky began to turn yellow again, no one fled to the mountains. The colonists sat in their homes and listened to the rising wind. They heard the scream of the crystalline winds approaching. They felt their walls shake and their shutters rattle. But this time, there was no fear. Only patience. Only determination. Only the calm certainty of people who knew their buildings would hold. The storm raged for 3 days, just as before. The outer walls were damaged, just as Daniel's wall had been damaged. Some roofs cracked. Some shutters broke. But when the storm passed, every building was still standing. Every person was still alive. The Verni who had stayed behind to help rebuild emerged from their shelters and looked at the human settlement with new eyes. For the first time in 10,000 years, they had not run from the crystalline winds. For the first time, they had stayed and survived. HFY came to Daniel's cabin that evening. The building had survived its second storm, more battered than before, but still solid. Daniel was already planning repairs, making notes about which stones needed replacing and which beams needed reinforcing. "We have lived on this world for 10,000 of your years," HFY said. "We learned to run from what we could not defeat. And now? Now we learned something new." HFY looked at the scarred walls, at the stubborn little building that refused to fall. "We learned that sometimes the right response to destruction is not to flee, but to endure." Daniel smiled and offered the elder a cup of coffee. It was brewed from earth beans that he had somehow kept safe through 2 storms. HFY accepted the cup, sniffed the strange liquid with curiosity, and took a small sip. "This is unusual," HFY said. "It's an acquired taste." They sat together on the porch, watching the green sky return to its normal color. The landscape was scarred and bare, but already new plants were beginning to sprout from the crystal-covered ground. Life was returning, just as it always did. "I have been thinking about your grandmother's garden," HFY said after a long silence. "The flowers that she planted every year, knowing they would die. What about it?" "I think I understand now. The point was not the flowers. The point was the planting. The act of creating something, even knowing it would be destroyed. The refusal to let destruction stop creation." Daniel nodded. "That's part of it. What is the other part?" "Hope. My grandmother believed that every spring would come, no matter how harsh the winter. She planted flowers because she believed in the future. She believed that beauty was worth creating, even if it didn't last forever." HFY was quiet for a long time. The ancient alien's colors shifted through shades of blue and green and purple, emotions that Daniel could not quite read. "Perhaps that is what we lost," HFY finally said. "Not just the ability to build, but the hope the building was worthwhile. We became so afraid of destruction that we forgot how to create. You can learn again. We all can." Above them, the green sky was already beginning to shift toward yellow around the edges. Another cycle was ending. Another storm was approaching, perhaps in 10 months, perhaps in 12. But this time, both species would be ready. This time, they would face the storm together. This time, they would endure. Daniel finished his coffee and stood up. There was work to do, repairs to make, new buildings to plan, a future to build. He picked up his hammer, his grandfather's hammer, and went back to work. Behind him, Desok watched with something very close to admiration. In 10,000 years, the Varanai had learned to run from storms. In less than 2 years, one stubborn human had taught them that there was another way, not to fight the storm, not to defeat it, but to endure it, to survive, to be still standing when the winds finally stopped. It was not a human thing, Daniel had said. It was a living thing. And now finally, the Varanai were beginning to understand.